Welcome to the Businesses Start Here podcast, hosted by David Vigliotti and Vigliotti and Associates. We're here to talk with business owners and business experts to inspire and encourage entrepreneurs.
Hello, welcome to the Businesses Start Here podcast. We're back with another episode. Very excited about our guest today. It's Kison Patel. He has started, it sounds like he started a few different businesses or has one business that's evolved in multiple different ways. He's going to tell us a story about that. He comes from a mergers and acquisition background. So I think that's going to be very interesting to a lot of people that listen to our podcast. So without taking too long, let's get to Kison. Welcome, and thanks for being here with us.
Hey, thanks for having me, David.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Boy, that's a story of its own. I didn't sort of have the framing for success starting out. I knew I struggled in high school with a very short attention span, which is probably the standard these days.
Right.
And when I got into college, I struggled even more, especially when classes were lecture based. And in short, I basically failed out of college. I
Oh,
one
wow.
day got a letter that I'm getting dismissed for academic deficiency, and having immigrant parents, that wasn't good news. They were
Right.
not happy about it. I think at one point I was concerned whether my parents were either going to disown me or kill me. So I didn't want to go home to find out, and remember staying with the other family members.
I was going to
So
ask if they let you move back in.
yeah, not for a while. It took a while. I ended up where it was a tough time at the job market wasn't great. I ended up working with a family member that owned a number of franchise restaurants in the south side of Chicago.
Mhm.
A lot of these were in tough neighborhoods,
Mhm.
and I had to start from the bottom. Working from the family is not an easy street
No.
walk. I just started out just washing dishes, and that's where I learned to work. I learned to build my work ethics,
Yeah.
learned to create the disciplines to push myself and get comfortable doing these things that I prefer not to do.
Yeah.
And
What year was this when that happened?
this is probably 2000, 2001,
Okay.
like around that time.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm like 20 years old, maybe around then. I got
Okay.
about, yeah, it was like second year in school and then getting ready to get into the third, but didn't finish. So,
Yeah.
I, uh, I built up from the bottom. I just really
Yep.
pushed myself and got in the right direction to learn things, to work hard. And at the end of the year, I was managing 2 locations for them.
Oh, wow.
Got offered a partnership opportunity, but wanted to pursue bigger goals. At the time, I was very ambitious and set on making $1 million. For whatever reason, that was my
Right.
goal at 21. Was I got to
Yeah.
make $1 million? That's money's going to solve my problems or whatnot. And the goal was to do that in 5 years. So I thought the path to do that was getting into real estate, and that I
Mhm.
don't need to have a college degree to get into real estate.
Right.
At the time, I think before even turning 21, I got my license as a broker. I was excited to get in the career. I joined a residential real estate company called Baird& Warner. By this time, I got back in my parents' house. I was staying with them, still working part-time at one of these Subway franchises. And I struggled. Nobody wants to buy houses from a young 21-year-old kid.
Yeah.
I was frustrated. It's a different type of sale than I expected. It wasn't so much of a direct financial transaction. They tend to be
Right.
more emotional transactions. And it was tough. I was interested in businesses. I knew that growing up or around the business environment. So I basically um, found a person that was a one person in a 90-person brokerage shop that was selling commercial real estate. Chatted with him. It got the encouragement to go pursue the other opportunity where I ended up moving over to a little startup that was creating an M&A advisory practice, but everybody's kind of new at it, and they were trying it, and it was a really good experience. It was tough. I got to get hands on working with private owners that wanted to buy companies or sell businesses, and had to run the process end to end. Had to do a lot of cold calling. Had to do all this work to make these deals happen. But what I found is I really, really enjoyed looking at financials, analyzing businesses, sitting down with clients and helping them understand where the opportunities are, creating a narrative of what the business does, how value can be created from that business, and actually sold a number of businesses that first year. The only thing is I didn't believe in the firm's long-term goals or their strategy in general, that they really didn't have a clear focus.
Okay.
So I went and started a practice of my own, again, still pretty early. I'm maybe 22, 23 at that time. And a lot of hard work. It was just a lot of hard work. I was fortunate. Internet was really becoming a thing to start utilizing to identify potential customers and market these assets. So we were really early on that. We're really early on creating a newsletter. I think back then we used to do it by fax. You got software to like mass fax people. Then you started switching over to emails, and then there's little things that we did that really helped our firm seem like it was much bigger than it actually was.
So
Uh,
when you started the firm, you're saying we, was it just you or did you have partners or how many people were in the firm when you started?
I started by myself. I started just single person. I brought in somebody as an assistant. I said,
Mhm.
"Hey," it's somebody I stumbled upon that was in a job, wasn't happy about it, and he was on a visa. I think he was on a work visa, so he's kind of like limited in his options.
Right.
So I said, "Hey, I'll give you a shot with this thing." But he was really good. He turned out to be a resource that ended up running full sales cycle on
Oh, wow.
transactions and became a partner. A couple of years into it.
Awesome.
So that was nice. That really helped out because I think a lot of things you don't realize is you get caught up in the operational components and
Yep.
you don't get to do the stuff that you're really good at, which is making deals. And he got the opportunity to really focus on the deal parts, making the transactions happen. And we built that. We had a nice run with hotels. That was probably the biggest asset
Uh-huh.
class that we were working with. Then we started working with small financial institutions like community banks, helping them raise capital, do buy side advisory, sell side advisory, and it was fun. I think there are a couple things that ended up shifting the business to go in a different direction where it ultimately got wound down. Uh, One was that I had a bit of a frustration of the nature of that consulting practice where you're living by the wire, deal by deal. Every
Mm,
night you get excited, you close the deal, you got to go chase down the next one.
right.
So that was like a little bit. You get some wear after doing that for a number of years. I
Yeah.
think the other thing was there's a sort of glass ceiling I felt we were encountering.
Okay.
We did a lot of these $5 to $20 million transactions, but anytime you got an opportunity to get up to 100 million, they tended to get sent over to a branded firm. That was really
Okay.
difficult to compete with the larger firms. So that was frustrating. That's what I was excited about, was you wanna continue your growth and
Right.
journey in your career. So that's
Was it
where
a was it a the bigger firms have the skill or it was just purely they had the name and that's what people found security in that name?
I personally thought it was all the name, that
Yeah.
it's a name, and I obviously, if you've been in the industry and you got relationships and things of that
Right.
sort. But, I yeah, that's where a little bit there was some frustrations with that. So I was exploring other areas in the industry. At one
Mhm.
point, I thought about starting a private equity fund. At the time, there was a lot of emphasis on emerging manager programs, a lot of, pressure from legislative to use diverse, like, minority-owned, firms for asset management and these alternatives. But that was a tough one to put together because there's an expectation that you have a significant investment experience where you've invested in and built out a return. And I primarily worked on the advisory side and putting together a management team. Everybody wants a slice of their pie, and by the
Right.
time you put that management team together, there's no pie left for you. So I started looking at this tech space, and I got really interested in that area. Um, I started working on more of a marketing type of play. I remember doing diligence on a company that I was acquiring. It ultimately fell through when the recession happened. We lost the financing and the deal
Uh,
didn't transpire or transact. But what it introduced me to was this one transaction where this company, this like specialized clinic company, bought a portfolio of 100.coms for $6 million, and I thought this is really
Wow.
interesting. Why would you spend $6 million for all these .coms?
Right.
And then what they did is they optimized it for search and created a lead generation model so that they can send all these leads to their clinics that they had.
Hmm.
And that's where I got really interested in that. I started looking at the finance space and realized that the ad uh, costs were really high. Like back then, it was like 25 cents a click, 50 cents a click, but
Oh
this
wow.
space had about $2, $3 a click. So I started buying a bunch of these .coms and little basic thing. I put a blog post up there, wrote a tiny little script. So when someone revisits it, it just posts the next blog post that's in the series.
Okay.
And this sort of tricked Google into thinking copy was constantly updated, and it would
Right.
just skyrocket the ranking. You had your AdSense on there to get some ad revenue. I started
Right.
making money doing that, and it kept growing and growing. We kept
Huh.
next thing you know, we had about 500 .coms, had about 200 lit up through a custom made platform using some open source technologies. And that we had a really elaborate setup, big database of thousands of these publicly available articles and an algorithm that designated by the keyword of the domain on what content to display.
Wow.
Then one day Google changed their algorithm and everything was gone,
Yeah.
completely
Did,
off the grid.
did you code that yourself, or did you have someone do it, or was there a software that you were able to leverage?
No, we were at that time, I was hiring engineers. I was investing money into this.
Yeah.
That's where it was tough because you start getting to the point where you get excited when you see some revenue growth and you're investing forward, then boop, everything gets cut off, and
Yeah.
that it was tough. But it was a good lesson. The one big thing that really piqued my interest in that experience was going from when I first started and defaulted to using Excel sheets to track all the tasks that need to get done when project managing these different engineers that were custom building this functionality. Where I one of them introduced me to one of these project management tools like Jira back then, and I was amazed on how much more efficient that was to use a project management tool as opposed to these myriad of Excel sheets that we had. And that's what gave me the inspiration in 2012 to start the company Deal Room to bring that kind of project management product to the space I was most familiar with, mergers and acquisitions.
Hmm.
And from there, I can't say it was a smooth, easy story. This is when you start shifting and saying, "I'm going to be a tech entrepreneur." And I feel like a lot of people do that, where they got an idea for an app or something they want to build, and I had that, and the immediate challenge I had was, okay, I want to outline this and build a plan on what to build. Then you start thinking about other functionality you can have, and then more functionality.
Right.
I think the term's feature creep, and you
Yep.
build this outline that does 100 different things. And like, all right, where do we start? And
Yeah.
then you like, well, let's start in the early phase of the process, which is when you got to find the deal.
Yeah, and you can
Uh,
get away from the core of why you started the product sometimes because of
it,
that feature creep for sure.
we had inspiration, and then we were starting to build something that wasn't directly that, and it was interesting because we did that. We took a product out. It really didn't work well. I mean, it was basically like a big dumpster for deals that we ended up taking. We had about 200 deals listed, 1,300 users, and realized this is all garbage. Went back to the drawing board and took more of let's do a research first. Let's really understand the problems. Interview these cohorts of potential customers.
Yeah.
Really take more of that science based approach. Can we talk to them, great questions as unbiased as possible, understand from their lens what are the biggest challenges they're facing, and have them describe that so we can understand it, weight it, um, and just see how they look at it. When we went through like a series of these interviews, 30, 40 of them, you'll start seeing patterns. And the thing we noticed was people don't have a problem finding the deals. It was managing those transactions that was really hard. We got a laser, and it helps a lot because you validate the problem you're solving by having these references of folks you talk to. You have a much better understanding of the problem. You have better ways to talk about it because now you have this language from the
Right.
folks that have encountered it directly. And I think sometimes you can actually find better problems to solve than you originally thought.
Yeah, so that's a problem I see a lot, and in conversations we have on this podcast a lot is I think the biggest mistake people make is they just go straight to market with a problem they have, and it usually is a problem that everybody else has, but they may not have the exact right solution, or your problem may be slightly unique, and having those conversations with your customers or potential customers is huge because, like you said, you might be solving a problem, but there might be a better problem to solve that provides more value to the client. It's going to bring you more revenue. It's going to make everybody happier. So it's interesting however many conversations we do that almost always comes up that you went to market too early without talking to customers. It's a pretty common problem, a theme that we hear.
It's assumptions.
Yeah.
You're blind to your how much you're putting on these assumptions that you have. When you have conversations with people and tell them your idea, there's this bias because it's your idea. So, and
Right.
people are friends and family are always going to want to be nice to you. They're not trying to just rain on your parade.
Right.
So you sort of have that. You have undertones in your conversation where you're convincing people to agree with your idea when you need to do the opposite. You need to find out why it won't work objectively. That's why it's really important to enter those conversations or interviews with people with this mindset that you don't know anything or whatever you know is wrong.
Right.
That
That's
puts
a
you in
good
a
point.
really different state to learn. I,
That bias isn't talked about enough, I don't think. Um, like you said, everybody talks to their friends and family, and they don't get the true answer for that exact reason. So bias is very important. And when you're talking to people that aren't friends and family, you have to do a good job of making sure you're not selling it at that point because your goal is really to find out if it's good, if it's a good idea. But if you go in selling, and if you're a good salesperson, you're going to get the answer you want to hear. You need to get
yeah.
the answer you don't want to hear.
So, say I got a product to like make accounting audits easier, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, the data collection's the biggest problem. So I'm gonna build this tool, this workflow that makes it a lot easier. I want to validate that problem. I can't be like, hey, Dave, talk to me about your data collection problems.
Right.
It's like, no, let's back up a little bit. Hey,
Because
David.
I've got plenty to talk about there,
Well,
but there's
David,
other problems too,
uh,
right?
listen, you've been in this field for a number of years, and have a significant experience. But what I want to hear is, what's the biggest challenge that you face
Right.
today?
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Yeah. And it actually is data collection.
Okay, now we're on to something, right?
Right.
Now maybe that's going in the right direction, and say,
Right.
hey, tell me more. Like, what about it? And then try to weight it too. Like, how big? I mean, is that like a paperclip problem, or is that
Right.
if somebody solved that for you, like what kind of price would you put on it? Which gets later on. Later on, when you start like modeling, you do the same thing. You want to keep this feedback loop because I might come back and wireframes tend to be tough. I prefer to get like a student to do some mock-ups so people can see a little better visual. And I say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I'm thinking to build. What do you think? And keep that feedback loop going. And then
Right.
at that time, that's where I want to start validating. Well, what's this worth to you? And what would you
Right.
pay? Again, people can be biased about that too. Well, what if I told you it's $500 a month? And okay, great. So you want to validate that, and then as you get even further, coming back with even like a little working model, it's like, okay, what's the go to market going to look like? This is another big mistake that we made.
Yeah.
We didn't do this. We didn't validate a go to market. So I just started copying what the incumbents were doing, which
Mm-hmm.
was a terrible idea. They
Right.
have sales reps. They have a huge balance sheet to work off of. They pay them well. They give them bottomless expense cards. They're whining and dining folks, and that's not how we should be selling an innovative technology. It should be really based on the value that we're out there to create.
Right.
So that's like an important thing is, can you validate your go to market while you're learning and keeping that feedback loop as you go through taking the solution and get closer and closer to taking. Now, at this point, we have invested. Let's talk about the capital investment. This
Yeah.
is where it trips me up, these entrepreneurs that want to rush to build a product, rush to take something out. And I can get to a whole other thing about why I don't think we even need new products right now. I think the bigger problem is the distribution model, that there's enough great products out there that you can learn how to do the distribution part, which is the hard part. And
Hmm.
then when you know how to do that, go build products or whatever you want.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other talk track. But that's the key thing is really being able to do this legwork upfront early.
Right.
The interviews to validate the problem doesn't cost any money; it costs time.
Right.
Like time after time, I mean, how many people have you talked to? Go do like 30 or 40 of those interviews. In fact, the fact when you approach people that you think would be prospective customers or represent a cohort of them, and you tell them, "Hey, I'm looking to solve this problem and wanted to learn from your experience, interview you for a little bit," and nobody replies to you, that's probably an early indicator they
Right.
don't care about that problem. So, right, there's like validation from the very beginning of doing this. You go through, do these interviews, you get the patterns, but when you go to this later stage, you wanna raise money, this is validation. This is like, "Hey, I've talked to these people." In fact, if you do this properly, you're likely to line up some customers that are
Right.
advocates and saying, "Yes,
Exactly.
you're gonna buy them." They'll make some intros for you, and that happens. When you go through this, you always, at the end, ask for an introduction. They go, "Yeah, you should talk to so and so."
Right.
So, and then you do the mock-ups, even then, not lot of cost. The challenge is when you rush through this stuff, you rush through it, sometimes you don't solve for the right problem. Sometimes you are solving for the right problem, but then you take the solution, but there's these things you could have changed for the user experience. Once you build a product, it is extremely expensive to make changes, and that timeline it extends is also extremely expensive. And all this is very painful too, where if you would have made these changes earlier when you had these little mock-ups for a designer to quickly move a button around and things like that, again, extremely inexpensive. It doesn't delay your timelines. So that's probably one of the biggest challenge I think I see with entrepreneurs is they skip a lot of this validation stuff in the beginning, rush to go
Mhm.
take a build a product and take it out to market. And I get the speed is name of the game, but keep those steps intact. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah, I was talking to a client the other day. I said, if you want to go fast, you're going to need a lot of cash. It's not cheap to go quick, because you're going to make mistakes going too fast. You're going to have to come back and fix things. You're going to have to undo things. Um, so if you're bootstrapping something, you need to take the time to do the due diligence up front and make sure that you're really understanding the problem and the solution, because you might have the right problem but not the right solution. Um, so deal room is kind of where we are. Why don't you tell me a little bit about where it is today? I was on the website. You were talking about go to market. I saw you have like a go to market expert on your website, and it looks like it's a classroom where people can basically learn how to build a company that can be part of an M&A.
Yeah, so we're gonna build off of this theme of building a feedback loop because I think that's the crux or sort of vein of our existence, but also the biggest factor to our success.
Yeah.
We went through this marketplace model, didn't work out, got back to the drawing board, and really found that people want a better solution to manage transactions, which is the original inspiration for this. So we got back to that, and again, we really detailed it out and got a nice solution that worked well. What we focused on was one thing: was solving diligence. That was the reoccurring thing we heard is when you go to buy a company, you have to review a lot of information to
Right.
make sure what's represented is true and accurate, and you want to identify the risk in the transaction, and in doing that, what companies traditionally do is they use Excel to list all the information that they want to request. And once you get this information, you typically have a series of questions to follow up, clarification questions,
Right.
and you end up putting those comments back on this Excel tracker. The next thing you know, you're trying to have a dialogue on Excel tracker, you're emailing this thing around like 13 times throughout the transaction. It gets very cumbersome quickly. People lose stuff. They're asking for it for like the third or fourth time. You get frustrated and then you're like finding it from the email you sent before and not a great experience.
Right.
What we did was we took the virtual data rooms that are also used for the file security, which is like Dropbox with extra compliance and audit controls,
Mhm.
and put them together. So we had project management workflow and this, and it just made it so much easier. You didn't have to manually type in index numbers and reference things. It automated a lot of that, where you had the list of information, drag and drop documents, automatically organizes in the secure data room, links it up, adds like a commenting, just like we have in social media, so you can chat
Right.
back and forth and really prioritize things easier and pull out reports, understand who's looking at what, where the progress is. That's the first thing we solved for, and this is the go-to-market stuff where we tried to sell this to investment banks. That wasn't our early adopters. But we did find the corporations, large corporations that do a number of acquisitions, were the early adopters. Started getting traction there. Again, that same approach. Let's talk about problems, because we're not
Right.
just focused on the solution and that's it. We want to always do this initial discovery to understand for each customer what's their view on the challenges that they're currently trying to solve for, because this might not be a priority at the current time. Those challenges evolve, and we found soon after that a lot of firms had a bigger challenge of what to do after they closed on the transaction, when they had to actually integrate the company.
Mhm.
And we
Yeah.
realized, like, this is actually a bigger, more complex problem. um, but we can actually do things in the front end that can help stage things for that latter part to be more successful. So we added functionality to manage integration, and ultimately created this nice value proposition of having a solution that did both, that could do both and connect the process together so that there's better knowledge transfer, better clarity on priorities, better collaboration, and just really bring that continuity in that process. So really compelling value proposition. Again, just keeping that ear open. What are the challenges you're dealing with? If you identify another opportunity, extend the functionality of the product. Then later on was the senior folks, or the leaders of the group. They're really focused on hunting deals down. So it's like, what if we added functionality for that to manage the pipeline and tracking of these deals? Because you're the company, they're not ready to sell today. Maybe they
Right.
will be in a month, maybe a year. I had one told me 10 years later that the person finally sold. So being able to track that's really important, but now you can create this continuity from the early stages of sourcing the deal to when you start doing diligence and the various stages involved there, then integration. So the product became a full lifecycle management solution. And then this is where it gets interesting, because this is, again, we're still like very much tech product focused. In this journey of working with a variety of corporations, one of the things that I took note of was that each company had a very unique way of looking at mergers and acquisitions, that they had their own approach. What made it interesting was that it created some challenges for us, because now we can't
Right.
cookie cutter and apply the same thing across the board, because they all do
Right.
things very different. But then the view on that was, well, there's a bigger problem, is that this industry itself is very siloed off and disconnected, that it lacks standardization and best practices. Like, we can identify where's the real evidence in the approaches these organizations were taking.
Mm.
And that's what led to, I would say, an idea that there's this, or identification that there's a problem. Around this time, about 5 years ago, a friend of mine in marketing was advocating to do a podcast. My buddy Andy's like, "Hey man, you should do a podcast." And I'm like, "What the hell's a podcast?" And he's like, "Don't worry about it. It's gonna be the next big thing. You just got to do it." And I told him, I said, "Well, we do these like research calls," and he's like, you know, he's like, "Yeah, just publish that."
Huh.
But so we sort of married the idea of why not use the podcast as a platform to enable practitioners to be able to share lessons learned.
Right.
So we, in turn, could take that same approach we do with the research, look for the patterns, identify the proven techniques in the industry, and document that. That turned into a whole bunch of we take transcripts of all these interviews. We write blogs, ebooks. We ended up publishing 2 books. The one notable book was called Agile M&A, which was based on case studies with Google and Atlassian, particularly how they utilize agile techniques stemming from their engineering culture to M&A
Mm.
with great success. And we published that book as a framework to help enable other corporations to move from a waterfall approach to an agile based approach, and that's allowed us to have a lot of conversations, be a resource to major corporations that are in that phase of making that transition.
Can you talk about a little bit about the difference between waterfall versus agile?
Yeah, I mean, it stems from the software space, and some of the ideas actually came from manufacturing, like the Toyota. If
Mhm.
I encourage folks to look at Toyota production
Yeah.
system, there's anything lean, like lean management's actually really good to look at, because you learn a lot of
Okay.
the management approaches along with the different techniques that they develop there in that manufacturing system. And so a lot of agile inspiration comes from that, and
Yeah.
that's the thing. The best thing to do is borrow ideas from other industries. So
Yeah.
with a software engineer was interesting that this traditional waterfall approach, you're going to build software, you create this very detailed requirement book basically. and it's every little detail specified, and then you give it to team engineers and they go build it. Um, there, the problem with that is it's again based on a lot of assumptions. When users
Right.
start looking at it, like, oh no, this doesn't look right. This should be like this, and blah blah blah. Now at that point, it's extremely expensive to make those changes, and the timelines will kill you in terms of cost. Um, the structure of those teams too, I'm going to take note of as well, because typically you'd have all the back end engineers in a team, front end engineers in a team, QA people, designers, etc. Right? Pretty
Mhm.
inefficient when they're working as those functional units. So when we contrast that with an agile model, we're not building out this detailed plan. Instead, we're going to look at what are the value drivers, which in software is feature sets. Or say, let's list out the feature sets in this descending order of priority. So we can really focus on delivering a set of features that's the most important and just get something simple out there so that we can validate what we're building, get the feedback, and be able to iterate on it. Um, the nice thing about this too is you're really detailing out the first thing you're building, maybe the first two things, and then the rest just sits as an outline.
So it essentially fits the same thing we talked about earlier. You're getting that input as each step moves along, right? So you're not getting to a complete product and realizing we were heading down path A, we veered off into path B, and there's we have to go back to that point we veered off. You can veer off a little bit correct, a little bit correct, instead of getting
Now,
a
now
year
here
down the road with
the
software.
one additional thing is we're adding the concept of continuous delivery of value.
Right. Yeah.
Because I'm not waiting 6 months to get this whole thing done and deliver it. I'm delivering you that first feature set within a number of weeks,
Yeah.
right? Fully functional. Here you go. Use it. Give me feedback on it. We're going to work on the next feature set. Now, if we decide plans change, we're like, wait a minute, this feedback came in. We don't even need this feature set that we plan to build. I can literally cross that right out. We didn't waste a bunch of time planning to build it or anything like that.
Right.
Or we may say, hey, you know what? This feature set's actually way more important than we thought it was. Let's bump that up in priority, quickly drag it up, and boom. Now we know that we're going to work on it a lot sooner.
Right.
So
So
it
it's kind
just
of the MVP model as well. So you're getting the minimum viable product out there in their hands, getting feedback, providing value as quickly as you can, and then adding features as the customers require them or as you know that they're needed.
so the with that, the focus and emphasis shifts from building a detailed plan to responding to changes as they're happening.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's a big thing. That's what we want to create, this agile model. Like
Right.
we need to make changes quickly. We're gonna do it. The team structure I want to note of as well, because now with these agile teams, we don't have that same infrastructure. We're creating these small little teams where we just have maybe one of each. We have one back end programmer, one front end, one designer, one QA person, and they can go off on their own and build full functionality,
Right.
and they can move quickly. So that and I think too, because they're working together in one pod, the dependencies that happen, they're very conscious about that, especially when you add like some of the things like stand-ups, like you talk about them on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But that team could move way faster. So now you
Yeah.
got a more efficient approach of developing and a team that's just designed to move quickly. Now, our industry, we saw the exact same parallels. We look to buy a company and you have very little information in the beginning. You have to make a financial model based on a lot of assumptions. And as you go through diligence, you get additional information that you then need to respond to as you
That,
identify risks and opportunities in the transaction you're working on.
right.
When you go to integrate that company, the same challenges apply, but that same approach with the team structure applies as well. Like, why are we trying to integrate these by these functional based work streams? Why not identify the value drivers of the deal? Like, what are we buying here? Is it the customers? Is it the technology? What is it? The team of engineers? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
Then be able to prioritize how we're going to integrate that company to make sure that we get the value delivered in the order that needs to be achieved.
That's really interesting because I worked as an auditor, and knowing what you're buying is seems like such a basic concept, right? You're buying a company, but what is that company? What is it made of? When I was an auditor, we worked with two banks that had a deal with each other. They sold one bank sold another a piece of their company, and nobody knew what was included in the sale. Like it wasn't drawn out in the agreement, and that's an extreme example, but it's something that's so basic that it's so easy to overlook. What exactly are you buying? People don't put the time into that because you think you know what the company is, what they do, what their purpose is. But sometimes you might be buying a culture because you have a culture problem. You want to bring that culture into yours. There's obviously revenue piece of that, but you're trying to buy a specific thing from that company, right? So I'm glad you brought that up because it's something that's easily overlooked and often is.
These deals are complex. There's definitely a lot to look at. There's the mechanical stuff, and like you mentioned, David, the cultural piece is a whole other thing. And
Yeah,
sometimes we get fixated on the numbers. But I will say that's the biggest thing we're seeing changing in the industry is shifting from a finance focused M&A approach to a people focused M&A approach, where you're putting a lot more consideration on those components, really understanding each respected organization's unique values to better understand the culture and the leadership approaches. Um, ultimately, each company has their own approach when it comes to problem solving and decision making.
right.
And when they come together, like that's got to align well. Otherwise, you create some friction.
Yeah, there's a lot of horror stories, big public horror stories of mergers that just the finances made perfect sense, looked like a perfect marriage, and then it never stabilized because the cultures were so different or the problem solving was done differently. So it's a key piece, and it makes sense that it's moving in that direction because the finances are the minimum that you need to get the merger done. I would assume, and the culture and the way the companies fit together is kind of the piece that can hold up the whole thing.
Yes. That's a big thing that we really emphasize now is how do you do that front end preparation so that all those pieces after the deal come together? Because ultimately, integration is the phase where you either create value or destroy value.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so tell me about the podcast. So you're I think it's evolved a little bit if I understand correctly, and I know you
The,
have another passion project for a podcast. If you want to talk about that as well.
the podcast has evolved into a full digital media business. Again, that same feedback loop. We've identified a need for better events in our industry and launched a series of events that we do quarterly. We've then added an online academy program from feedback from doing those events where attendees wanted to know more of the practical how to's. So we
Oh,
have a number of actual practitioners that then teach other practitioner courses and help them with improve their practice. We continue to do that. We're
yeah,
seeing, more of these challenges, and we create solutions to solve them, which is where our business has evolved into several different business lines that generally fall into the theme of education and technology. But it's been fun. We've done some things for the better of the industry. We launched a diversity scholarship program that falls along with our foundation to help give back, to open up opportunities for those that are interested in a career of M&A or want to explore it, that may or be women or people of diverse backgrounds. Because I think if we're going to solve the diversity program, we should start with education and
yeah,
creating the greater talent pool.
yeah,
Um, just giving partnerships with some of the universities that don't have access to the practical materials, given our network of corporate practitioners that are happy to give back, and we're able to bridge those resources to other institutions to help provide that to students that are actively learning in the field. The passion project, it's a fun little project. I got 3 young children. My oldest, my daughter, Shyla, I always looked at her as like you're a natural born leader. You kind of have to be being the firstborn.
right.
And I think I was around 7 years old. I remember reading Ray Dalio's Principles with her. And it was way above her reading level, but it was just fun to get these conversations about goals and what are the milestones to achieve goals. How do you problem solve? What's the difference between open minded, closed minded? How do you deal with closed minded people? These type of things. And it got me really thinking and identifying with my principles that I said, hey, I'm going to share my stuff, but it's going to evolve for you as you get older. Later when she was about 9, I said, why don't we make a point to do some interviews with other folks that have found success and understand what were their principles, what drove them to be successful. And we ended up starting a little podcast series called Boss Move, and it's just geared towards learning about what others have utilized in terms of their values, principles to be successful. And I know I hope one day I can turn it into a curriculum to give back to some of these schools because I think a lot of the stuff they don't teach in our general education programs, stuff like empathy, the stuff I really emphasize is like just discipline, what that means. How do you build that in to achieve the goals
Right.
and things like that. But yeah, that's a fun little passion project of mine.
That's great. And then the other podcast is called M&A Science, right?
Correct. M&A Science is our M&A podcast.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So we're kind of wrapping up a little bit. You went through a lot of your history and everything that you've been through. Plenty of lessons learned there. What's one lesson that you would give to somebody who's about to start their entrepreneurship journey that you learned and need to pass on?
Well, we talked about validating ideas and things of that, but think of empathy. I would put a big emphasis on that. It's something even for myself as early leader really struggled with, and I think understanding empathy helped me the most. Where you typically will enter conversations with people professionally, personally, with an agenda.
Right.
And if you can push that agenda to the side initially and get in that mindset, even if sometimes you're a subject matter expert in a meeting, like, hey, you want to show what you know, put all that to the side, assume what you know is wrong or you know nothing. Really focus on understanding what the other person's thinking. Understand how they feel, why they feel that way. What are their goals? What are their challenges? How can you align yourself to help them overcome those challenges, achieve those goals? And doing that will get you a lot more progress in achieving the things that you want to.
Yeah. That's great. It's the giver's gain philosophy, right? So if you're looking to help people, no matter what you get back, you actually end up getting back more than if you went in there trying to see what you can get from somebody.
I guess
Yeah.
it's your way to just connect with people in a much better way. I think builds more meaningful relationships.
Right.
And it's surprisingly applies with kids too, very
Yeah.
well. I think they actually know it much better. You want them to clean their room, connect with them first, and
Yeah. That's a
you
good.
know.
Yeah. That's a good point. I haven't thought of it that way. That's good. All right. So I appreciate you coming on. This has been a great conversation, getting to learn more about you, Deal Room, M&A Science, the Boss Move podcast. Those are all great things. So we appreciate you coming on. And thanks for sharing your experiences with us.
Thanks for having me, David. Enjoy the conversation.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the Businesses Start Here podcast. We hope you were inspired and encouraged by today's podcast. We would love to hear your feedback. Please send us an email at podcast@vilioti.com. That's podcast@VILLIOTTI.com. And be sure to share, like, and comment all of our content.